A wealthy CEO had not experienced intimacy in 2 decades, yet his new assistant transformed his world entirely. Before we dive into the tale, please share a comment and tell us your location. Delight in the narrative. The ambience at Smith Enterprises was particularly charged that morning. The typically bustling corridors buzzed with hushed conversations and inquisitive stares. Did you catch wind of this? A soft whisper escaped the lips of one of the administrative employees. Indeed, Henry Smith has brought on a new assistant. Is she aware of the rule? I have my reservations. This is bound to end in chaos. The guideline at hand was straightforward yet resolute. Henry Smith refrained from any interactions with women. Always, neither a handshake nor even a fleeting touch against another person. Throughout the years, the women in the workplace had become accustomed to this unusual trait. Some perceived it as mere billionaire quirkiness, while others spun elaborate theories surrounding a hidden trauma. The truth was, no one was willing to approach him too closely. However, Sophia Morris, the recently appointed personal assistant, was completely unaware of this. On her inaugural day, she found herself puzzled by the weighty atmosphere surrounding her. The gazes directed at her were a blend of sympathy and intrigue, as though she were a young lamb venturing boldly into the lair of a lion. "Morris, Emma," the executive secretary, exclaimed with urgency. "Mr. Smith is in need of a tie. Seize one and deliver it to him immediately." Sophia's eyelids fluttered momentarily. "Excuse me, could you clarify that?" "The necktie, Morris. He is scheduled for a meeting in 10 minutes. Quickly." "All right, just a draw." It wasn't a significant concern, she mused. What could possibly go awry? Sophia made her way to the executive dressing room, her fingers deftly opening the cabinet that housed Henry's collection of ties. And that's when a minor issue emerged. Approximately 50 individuals were present. What hue would a distant, unapproachable CEO choose to don? She whispered softly to herself. She chose a navy blue one, followed by a black one, and then a gray one. In a moment of sheer panic, she seized everything in sight. With her arms laden with ties, she strode purposefully toward the CEO's office. All she needed to do was step inside, give him the tie, and walk away. Uncomplicated. She rapped on the door. "Step inside." With a deep breath, she entered the room and spotted Henry Smith at his desk, meticulously adjusting the cuffs of his shirt, wearing that familiar look of someone who had just navigated a financial crisis before the morning meal. He raised his gaze to her, a frown creasing his brow. "What is that?" "Ties," Sophia remarked, halting before him. "Every single one? I wasn't sure which color you liked best, so I brought every option." Henry gazed at her for a moment, then released a deep sigh, as if trying to muster the patience that eluded him. "Provide me with one." Sophia let the ties cascade onto the desk, her hand reaching out to select one at random to pass to him. Henry lifted an eyebrow in curiosity. "Is it a patterned one?" She caught sight of the tie and, in her haste, recognized that she had chosen one adorned with small rubber duck prints. She swiftly retrieved it. "That's not the one. Hold on." She took another and offered it to him. With a subtle nod, Henry recognized the navy blue. Sophia beamed, a wave of relief washing over her. Task successfully completed. All she needed to do was slip away silently, but then her gaze fell upon it. Henry was attempting to tie his tie incorrectly. She blinked, then blinked once more. He was utterly tearing apart the fabric, as though he were attempting to choke an unseen specter. Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that this was a transgression against the very essence of corporate fashion, compelling her to intervene. Without hesitation, she moved forward and lifted her hands. "Hold on. Your approach is misguided. Allow me." And then she reached out to him. As her fingers lightly grazed the skin of his neck, Henry became utterly still. Sophia sensed the tension in his body beneath her fingertips. The abrupt change in the atmosphere felt tangible. And then, all at once, no, Henry recoiled as though struck by a jolt of electricity. Sophia's eyes grew large with surprise. What on earth just occurred? Henry gazed at her, as if he had narrowly evaded a perilous encounter. Your touch resonated with me. I was merely adjusting your tie, while Sophia frowned, believing it to be an excessive response. Please refrain from doing that in the future. All right, take it easy. I'm not emitting any harmful radiation, you know? Henry brushed his hand across his neck, attempting to wipe away the lingering sensation of her touch. His breath came in ragged gasps, and his gaze was fixed on her, filled with a deep, haunting anguish. You don't understand, he said, his voice strained. Then explain it to me, Sophia retorted, her arms crossed defiantly. This truly defies all logic. His fists tightened, as though he were battling an inner turmoil. I remain untouchable. What do you mean, cannot? Do you burst forth? Transform into a frog? This is serious business. Sophia became quiet. His tone was filled with utter hopelessness. He was profoundly unsettled. Henry averted his gaze, his jaw tightly set. Please refrain from doing that in the future. She paused, uncertain of the right words to express herself. She had never envisioned that a mere touch could provoke such a strong reaction. Yet, as she gazed upon his expression, she perceived a depth that transcended mere anger, terror. He was filled with dread. Sophia exhaled deeply, lifting her hands in a gesture of capitulation. Understood. I won't make any further contact. Henry's shoulders eased a bit, yet a sense of tension lingered in his expression. You are free to leave. Sophia let out an exasperated sigh. All right, understood. No physical contact. Yet, there will come a day when I unravel the mystery of what makes it so frightening. She rushed out of the office, utterly unaware of the events that had just unfolded. As the door clicked shut, Henry's hand lingered on the place where her fingers had just rested. His heart continued to race. This was an unprecedented occurrence. Yet, for reasons beyond comprehension, her touch lingered on. And that transformed everything. The office buzzed with a wave of inquisitive glances as Sophia Morris emerged from the CEO's office. Her cheeks tinged with color and her demeanor one of bewilderment. She was utterly bewildered by the events that had just unfolded. What was that all about? Henry Smith responded to her touch as though she had cast a spell upon him. Intense. That was the sole word that floated into Sophia's thoughts. She strolled to her desk and sank into her chair, rubbing her temples gently. Her first day was beginning to seem like a complete catastrophe. You made it through. The voice of Max Turner, the leader of the finance department, resonated next to her. He was a man in his mid-30s, perpetually clutching a cup of coffee, his face etched with the wisdom of someone who had witnessed everything this company had to offer. What do you mean by endured? Sophia scowled. Max rested against her desk, savoring a sip of his coffee. No one lays a finger on Henry. Always. Sophia's eyes fluttered briefly. This situation is becoming quite peculiar. Why not indeed? For the simple reason that he finds it unbearable. He follows a specific guideline. No woman can reach him. Sophia let out an exasperated sigh. Surely he could have given me a heads up before losing it, don't you think? Hold on a moment. Max's eyes grew large with surprise. Did you make contact with him? In a technical sense, absolutely. However, the blame lies with him. His tie was askew, and my desire for everything to be in its rightful place surged forth. I've just resolved the issue. Max regarded her with an expression that suggested she had just committed a monumental faux pas. Fundamental framework. Did you lay your hands on him? I just adjusted his tie. The man burst into laughter, clearly unable to believe what he had just heard. Well done, Sophia. You have just shattered 2 decades of established protocol. She let out an exasperated sigh. Oh, come on. An accidental touch does not lead to death. Unbeknownst to her, within the confines of the CEO's office, Henry found himself in a state of deep unease. Henry Smith found it difficult to concentrate on his tasks. His gaze was fixed on the report displayed on his computer screen, yet it all felt utterly incomprehensible. The charts, the spreadsheets, the market forecasts all appeared disorganized. And all due to what? One gentle caress. He glided his fingers over the collar of his shirt, the tie remaining impeccably in position. That was the source of his discomfort. He ought to have experienced unease, revulsion, apprehension. Yet, he remained untouched by any of those emotions. Even worse, he felt absolutely nothing amiss, and that filled him with dread. 2 decades had passed since someone had last touched him in that way, and it had ended in catastrophe. Since that time, his body had developed a strong aversion to any physical touch from a woman. But then, what set Sophia apart? He suddenly rose, sliding his chair aside, and strode toward the glass wall that offered a view of the city. His reflection in the glass revealed a man who, after a lengthy period, found himself shrouded in confusion. This must surely be a fluke, an anomaly. He had to put it to the test. 2 hours later, Sophia was engrossed in a report when the voice of Henry's secretary broke through on the phone. "Mr. Smith requests your presence in his office." Sophia stood still, caught in a moment of disbelief. "Once more?" "Indeed. Please provide the report from the investor meeting. He prefers that you give it to him in person." "Right into his hands?" Sophia arched an eyebrow, yet she took the papers and made her way to her boss's office. Upon her entrance, she discovered Henry positioned behind his desk, regarding her with that familiar, stern, inscrutable demeanor he always wore. "Here is the report, Mr. Smith," she said, approaching him with purpose. Henry extended his hand. She paused for a moment. "This guy totally lost it a few hours ago just because I touched him?" She contemplated. Nevertheless, she offered the documents to him. And then it unfolded. As Henry's fingers lightly grazed hers, a wave of tension coursed through his body once more. It happened swiftly, almost unnoticed by anyone around. Yet within him, it was as if entire universes were crashing together. Once more, he experienced it. A jolt surged through his senses. His heart raced with unexpected intensity. In an attempt to maintain composure, he snatched the papers with haste, resulting in one of the sheets slipping from his grasp and tumbling to the ground. Wow! Instinctively, Sophia lowered herself to retrieve it. As she rose to her feet, Henry also leaned down. The outcome? Forehead to forehead. The impact was subtle, yet it lingered in the air, giving rise to an uncomfortable stillness. His gaze lingered far too near to hers. Sophia stifled a chuckle. Should this be a test of reflexes, well done. You succeeded. Henry cleared his throat, straightening his posture and swiftly collecting the scattered papers. That was not an examination. Absolutely. Collaborative brainstorming is an effective approach to work. There was no reply from him. He simply faced his desk, feigning that nothing had occurred. Sophia folded her arms across her chest. "Excuse me, Mr. Smith? Indeed? Do you feel anxious?" He regarded her with a measured detachment. "I remain calm and composed." Sophia wore a sly grin. "In that case, I hope you won't object to my actions." She lifted her hand gently, feigning the intention to reach out to him once more. Henry recoiled abruptly, almost stumbling over his chair in the process. Stillness. Sophia chuckled softly. Incredible. For someone who typically remains calm, that was quite an intense response. Henry cast her a piercing look. "That will do for today. Feel free to go." Sophia stepped outside, laughter still bubbling from her lips, while Henry found himself, for the first time in years, utterly at a loss for how to navigate the moment. She presented a challenge. And even more troubling, he was beginning to enjoy it. Henry Smith had officially vanished. Following the tie incident and that dreaded report that compelled him to make even the slightest contact with Sophia Morris' fingers, he found it impossible to overlook her presence any longer. And that truly vexed him. For 2 decades, he had existed without anything or anyone penetrating his personal fortress. He maintained a respectful distance from any physical interaction with women, and it had always been a non-issue. Conversely, it had evolved into a steadfast principle, a meticulously organized framework that afforded him mastery over all aspects. However, Sophia made her entrance. She stood apart from every other assistant he had encountered. She appeared unfazed by him, showed no signs of nervousness in their conversations, and, Even more troubling, she dismissed his rules with a casual air. At that moment, Henry was committing the gravest error for someone of his caliber. He was focused on her. In the last few hours, he found his gaze wandering in search of Sophia, despite his intentions to focus elsewhere. As he walked past the cafeteria, he caught sight of her sharing laughter with her colleagues, and an inexplicable irritation bubbled up within him for no clear reason. In the midst of the meeting, he observed her biting her lip as she concentrated, and his mind catalogued that detail without any apparent purpose. To his utter dismay, he found that Sophia engaged in conversations with herself when she was by herself. Indeed, he had spotted her earlier in the office, fingers dancing over the keyboard as she softly murmured to herself. Who created these absurd spreadsheets? Were they crafted to torment helpers? She let out a sigh and then whispered, "If I screw this up, I can just imagine him glaring at me as if I've just shattered his whole existence." Henry arched an eyebrow. Was she referring to him? This shouldn't be capturing his attention. He ought not to be concerned. Yet he did. And then it unfolded. Sophia committed a minor error. It was merely a formatting issue in the financial report, nothing disastrous. Yet it was sufficient to draw his focus. He grasped the paper, scrutinized the error, and activated the intercom. "Sophia, please come to my office." At this moment, quietness lingered on the other end. Moments later, a tentative voice reached his ears. "Are you referring to this moment? Is it happening at this moment?" Henry shut his eyes, a surge of impatience washing over him. "That's precisely what I expressed." Moments later, Sophia entered his office. "If you address me like that over the intercom again, I might just have a small heart attack." Henry remained silent. He raised the report, indicating the error, and fixed his gaze on her. "What is this all about?" Sophia inclined her head, a look of concern crossing her face. "A sheet of paper." He let out a dramatic sigh, his eyes rolling in exasperation. "What seems to be the issue with this piece of paper?" She grabbed the sheet and swiftly glanced over it. Alas, Henry folded his arms, biding his time. "All right, I confess," Sophia let out a sigh. "I neglected to align the columns in the second chart. However, Mr. Smith, let's speak candidly. A misaligned table has never been the cause of anyone's demise. If I were seeking disorder, I'd launch a tech venture and don flip-flops to the office. However, that is not the case. Maintaining my standing is essential." Sophia arched an eyebrow. "Oh, you don't even wear flip-flops when you're at home?" Henry shut his eyes briefly, having completely exhausted his patience. "Sophia, okay. She lifted her hands. "I will take care of it. There will be no more misaligned tables, I assure you." She pivoted to depart. Just as she was about to open the door, Henry impulsively spoke out, caught up in the moment. "Do you frequently engage in self-dialogue?" Sophia stood motionless. Gradually, she pivoted to face him once more. "What do you mean?" Henry maintained a calm demeanor. "I noticed you quietly speaking to yourself earlier today. Is that something you find yourself doing frequently?" Sophia's eyes grew large with surprise. You witnessed me conversing with myself?" "Absolutely." She appeared truly unsettled. Alas, Sophia concealed her visage behind her hands. "This is quite unfortunate. What is the reason?" "I make an effort to appear at least a bit ordinary. And now you see I possess this imperfection." Henry scowled. "Isn't it a flaw to talk to oneself?" "No." Sophia paused, uncertainty flickering in her mind. "Are you really serious about this?" Henry let out a deep breath. "Sophia, I don't have the luxury to engage with others frivolously. I am the CEO of a billion-dollar enterprise." She fixed her gaze on him for a moment, then erupted into laughter. In that instant, Henry became acutely aware of the profound sense of comfort enveloping him. Sophia appeared unfazed by his riches. She approached him without any sense of reverence or distance. Unbeknownst to him, he was beginning to enjoy that. Yet he found himself unable to permit it. If this persisted, he would lose his grip. And Henry Smith maintained his composure at all times. Always, Henry Smith preferred to avoid distractions. His universe had consistently been organized, precise, with every element arranged to ward off the unforeseen. Yet, over the last few days nothing felt quite right. And it all stems from her. Sophia Morris. Ever since that woman shattered his boundaries, Henry discovered himself behaving in ways he never anticipated. He found himself overly focused on her, observing trivial details, such as the way her brow knitted together in concentration or the distracted manner in which she fiddled with her bracelet while perusing a document. This must come to an end. Still, despite his desire to maintain his routine, there was one thing that disturbed him more than anything else: the sensation. For 2 decades, he had steered clear of any physical interaction with women. The very idea of anyone breaching that boundary sent a wave of tension and discomfort through him. And then Sophia emerged, and nothing transpired. No aversión. There is no discomfort, no immediate desire to withdraw. That thought haunted him more than he was willing to acknowledge. This is not something he should be contemplating. He ought to concentrate on his tasks. Yet, as he grasped the gold pen, attempting to scrutinize a multi-million-dollar contract, his thoughts wandered back to days gone by, a history he had evaded with every means possible. 16 years ago, Henry had not yet ascended to the heights of financial success he enjoys now. In those days, he was merely a youthful heir striving to demonstrate his value amidst towering figures. Let's enjoy ourselves with those who merely skim through the comments. Drop pizza in the comments below. Only those who reach this point will truly comprehend. Let us return to the narrative. And like any youthful and aspiring individual, he held a strong belief in love. His heart was claimed by Amelia Wright, a woman whose sweet smile and captivating eyes enchanted him. He had devoted himself entirely to that relationship, convinced that Amelia was his partner, his confidant, his future wife, until the moment he uncovered the reality. She lacked affection for him. She was captivated by his wealth, his prominence, his power, and when a more formidable figure emerged, she departed without a moment's pause. The separation was not merely a source of anguish. The experience was deeply embarrassing. Henry recalled the scene with vivid clarity, as though it had unfolded just yesterday. Amelia grasped his hands tightly, her voice icy as she declared, "You were never enough." Those words pierced him like razor-sharp daggers. In that instant, a fracture occurred deep within him. It was at that moment he understood the deceptive nature of human touch. That affection might not be genuine, that any intimacy might ensnare one. Thus, he established his dominion. He created a separation, erect barriers. He ceased to have faith, ceased to permit himself any form of vulnerability. His connections turned shallow, merely tactical. And then, 2 decades slipped away. 2 decades without any physical contact. Up until Sophia Morris. Henry blinked several times, returning to the moment at hand. He clutched his pen with such intensity that his fingers had gone pale. His heart raced with an unusual intensity. This must come to an end. He would not permit a mere assistant to disrupt all that he had created. If Sophia had succeeded in penetrating his defenses, he would only strengthen them further. No more moments of ease would remain. Distance has taken its place. Keep your distance. Resolute in his decision, Henry rose from his seat and made his way to the door. He had to eliminate this issue at its source. Sophia sat at her desk, nibbling on a granola bar, as she meticulously reviewed a document on her computer. Everything appeared ordinary, until she sensed a gaze almost searing into her. She glanced upward and found Henry Smith before her, wearing the gravest expression she had ever encountered. She nearly gasped for breath. "Excuse me, Mr. Smith?" He folded his arms across his chest. "Moving forward, our interactions will remain entirely professional." Sophia's eyelids fluttered momentarily. Wasn't that already clear? He stood resolute. "No humor. Keep your hands to yourself. Avoid excessive closeness." Sophia gazed at him, perplexed. "Apologies, but is the closeness really needed? Our conversations are few and far between beyond the workplace. What do you suppose I'm up to?" attempting to captivate your interest. Henry was taken aback by that response. I never stated that. It seems you're perceiving me as a danger to your very being. He parted his lips to protest, yet silence enveloped him. Ultimately, she was correct at her core. He was being overly dramatic. However, this was the necessary response for him. This was the sole path to reclaim authority. Simply adhere to the guidelines, he stated with conviction. Sophia narrowed her eyes, choosing silence over confrontation. Understood, I'll follow your lead. She resumed her typing, offering him no additional regard. Henry lingered for a few more moments. The thought of Sophia no longer giving him her attention weighed heavily on his mind. He departed before he could act unwisely. The following day, Sophia resolved to maintain her distance. Should Henry seek a demeanor marked by icy detachment, he would certainly receive it. She handed him the reports with a sense of detachment, maintaining a strictly formal demeanor and limiting her interactions to only what was essential. To her astonishment, he appeared to be annoyed by it. As the day unfolded, she observed quick looks, solemn faces, subtle hints of irritation. Suddenly, an unforeseen event unfolded. As the afternoon waned, Henry summoned Sophia to his office. She entered the room and noticed he was cradling 2 cups of coffee. He offered one to her. Here it is. Sophia arched an eyebrow. And you? Did you get me coffee? Henry averted his gaze. The barista erred in their task. I picked it up unintentionally. She was aware that it was untrue. Oh, of course, because it's so common for baristas to confuse 2 identical coffees for the same individual. There was no reply from him. Sophia attempted to stifle a grin. Henry Smith sought to find a path toward reconciliation. Perhaps, just perhaps, he was more bewildered than he revealed. And that only added to the intrigue. That night, Henry Smith came to a startling revelation, one that overshadowed his struggles with touch. He came to understand that, regardless of his efforts to escape it, Sophia Morris had firmly taken residence in his thoughts, and he found himself powerless to alter that reality. Henry Smith always found social events unappealing. Elegant soirees, corporate gatherings, philanthropic celebrations. It was perpetually the same faces, the same insincere grins, the same shallow inquiries. However, in his role as the head of Smith Enterprises, he found himself with no alternatives. His arrival was anticipated. Avoiding these events would merely invite unwarranted speculation. This evening, he was required to be present at a charity auction. A gathering of business leaders, investors, and socialites feigning concern for worthy causes, while vying to outdo each other in extravagant spending on auction treasures. As if the situation couldn't get any more complicated, he was required to find a date. Historically, leaders of significant corporations participated in these gatherings accompanied by a partner. It might be a collaborator, a significant other, or a key ally. In Henry's situation, every choice was equally vexing. In a moment of spontaneity, he acted on a whim. Sophia, his assistant, glanced up from her computer, taken aback. Indeed, he inhaled deeply. This evening, I will be attending a charity event. I require a date. You shall accompany me. She blinked several times, a look of confusion crossing her face. Beg your pardon? It's an auction for a charitable cause. Uncomplicated occasion. All you have to do is be present, stay subtle, and stand alongside me as a representative of the company. Sophia folded her arms, observing him intently. All right, let's clarify this. She inclined her head. You've been quite vocal about your desire for space these past few days, and now you're asking me to accompany you to an event? Henry maintained his solemn demeanor. Indeed. She released a dramatic sigh. Mr. Smith, it seems you may be sending some rather confusing messages. Simply embrace it, Sophia. It will surpass the choice of anyone else. Incredible. I appreciate the excitement. He brushed off the sarcasm and refocused on his computer screen. Choose your attire wisely. I will collect you at 7 o'clock. Sophia parted her lips to respond, yet ultimately fell silent. If he wished to bring her to the event, who was she to decline? At precisely 7 o'clock, Sophia stood prepared. In contrast to her typical laid-back appearance at work, this evening, she was absolutely breathtaking. Her sleek black dress, with its delicate thin straps, embraced her curves with a refined grace, striking a balance between simplicity and sophistication. The fabric draped elegantly, accentuating her poised silhouette. Her hair, typically gathered in a haphazard bun during the day, now flowed in gentle waves. Upon Henry's arrival, clad in an impeccable black tuxedo, he took a moment to pause as his gaze fell upon her. Sophia arched an eyebrow. "Is there an issue?" He blinked, swiftly restoring his aloof demeanor. "None. Let us proceed." They strolled to the car, and moments later, they reached the opulent event hall. The ambience exuded elegance. Shimmering chandeliers, the gentle strains of classical music wafting through the air, and attentive waiters presenting flutes of champagne. Sophia surveyed her surroundings, acutely aware of the multitude of gazes directed at Henry. "It appears you have quite a following here." "Well known isn't quite accurate." "Ah yes, you are the enigmatic leader who keeps a distance from women. I imagine many of these folks are pondering how someone managed to persuade you to bring a date." He let out a deep breath. "Kindly be mindful of your language." Her lips curled into a smile. "Ah, but what would be the excitement in that?" While they conversed, a number of guests started to make their way toward Henry to offer their greetings. He upheld his characteristic calmness, addressing each person with courtesy. Sophia, however, found herself acutely aware of an unwelcome presence. A striking blonde woman with piercing eyes approached them. Her crimson gown contrasted beautifully with her pale complexion, and her smile seemed deliberately crafted. "Is that you, Henry?" The woman spoke with an icy sense of knowing. He merely inclined his head. "Is that you, Amelia?" Sophia sensed the palpable tension surrounding her. This was Amelia Wright, the woman who had shattered Henry's heart all those years ago, and judging by the glimmer in her gaze, their tale was anything but erased from memory. Amelia remarked with a hint of surprise, her gaze fixed on Sophia. "I didn't expect to see you here with a date." Sophia spotted a chance to indulge in some playful mischief. She entwined her arm with Henry's and offered a gentle smile. "Ah, he embodies the essence of a true gentleman. He would never allow me to go by myself." Henry tensed up. Amelia managed to put on a smile. "Is that really the case?" "Indeed, Henry has consistently exhibited a quiet demeanor." Sophia inclined her head. Perhaps he was simply biding his time for the perfect individual to shatter that barrier. Amelia observed her intently, yet remained silent. With that, she turned and departed in silence. Henry exhaled deeply, a weight of frustration evident in his breath. That was uncalled for. Sophia diminished in size. "I will not allow an ex to diminish my significance. It seems you take pleasure in stirring things up, don't you?" Her lips curved into a smile. "Let's just say I excel at creating equal opportunities." Henry observed her for a moment longer than was appropriate. She possessed an intriguing quality that set her apart. She felt no fear in his presence. She remained unfazed, and for the first time that night, he understood that perhaps having her by his side wasn't such a bad thing after all. After what felt like an eternity, when they finally departed from the event, Sophia was utterly drained. She settled into the car seat, releasing a deep, weary sigh. That was more draining than an entire day spent at work. Henry drove quietly, lost in his thoughts. She observed him for a brief moment. Was the event a triumph? He gave a slight nod. Indeed, the company's presence garnered a positive response. Sophia beamed. "And what of my own place in this? Did I succeed in presenting myself as an appropriate companion for the formal event?" Henry cast a quick look her way before redirecting his attention to the road ahead. "You were acceptable." She chuckled softly. "Is that really the best compliment I can expect?" He remained silent. Yet, for the first time that evening, a subtle, nearly undetectable smile graced his lips. Sophia observed, and she appreciated the view before her. As they arrived at the entrance of her building, she paused to look at Henry before making her exit. "I appreciate you bringing me along." He gave a slight nod. Sweet dreams, Sophia. With a warm smile, she stepped out of the car. As Henry observed the door of the building shut behind her, an unusual sensation washed over him. He ought to have felt a sense of relief that the night had come to an end. Yet, in some way, he was not, and that, above all else, left him utterly bewildered. Henry Smith found himself unable to drift into slumber. The clock showed 2:43 a.m., and he remained in the shadows of his opulent apartment, gazing at the ceiling as if the solution to his troubles lay concealed above. Yet he was fully aware of what was troubling him. Sophia Morris. The evening at the gathering was meant to be merely a formality. He was meant to escort her, meet his societal duty, and continue with his life, leaving the matter behind without a second thought. Yet, his thoughts were unable to dispel the vision of her. The way she grinned while playfully teasing Amelia. The elegance of her black dress as it cascaded around her while she glided through the ballroom. She grasped his arm with a confidence that was striking, unburdened by the trepidation that seemed to shadow every other woman in his presence. And most troubling of all, he didn't sense the urge to distance himself. That filled him with dread. For years, Henry had existed in solitude. He shunned human touch, finding it a source of discomfort, even revulsion. However, Sophia didn't influence him in the same manner. That simply could not be tolerated. He closed his eyes firmly, attempting to banish those thoughts from his mind. Yet, with each attempt to push them away, they surged back with even greater intensity. Feeling exasperated, he rose and made his way to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. Perhaps it was merely a passing fancy, something without significance. He simply had to adhere to his schedule and dismiss any notions of Sophia. That was everything. The following morning, Henry made his way to the office at his customary hour. He strode through the lobby, eyes fixed ahead, just as he did each day. As he walked by, employees stood a little taller, and not a soul would think to cross his path. Yet, in that moment, his gaze settled on Sophia. She sat at her desk, savoring the last of her coffee, chuckling at something Max Turner had remarked. That chuckle. Something within him contorted. Unbeknownst to him, his pace began to wane. It was a nuanced aspect. However, Max observed. The finance chief cast an amused glance at Henry, as though he was fully aware of the situation unfolding. "Greetings, Mr. Smith." Max welcomed him with a hint of playful mischief in his smile. Henry steeled his features and continued on his path, dismissing the comment. Sophia faced him, clutching a folder filled with documents. "Good morning, sir. Prepared for another demanding day filled with data and discussions?" He paused beside her desk, his gaze fixed on the folder she clutched. "Is the report completed?" "Here it is." She offered the folder to him. Henry paused briefly before accepting it. The recollection of their final contact lingered vividly in his thoughts. To his astonishment, Sophia held on a moment longer. She grasped it tightly, compelling him to meet her gaze. "Are you doing all right?" The inquiry took him by surprise. "Excuse me? You appear to be a bit different today." He maintained a calm demeanor, yanking the folder from her grasp with a bit more intensity. "I'm doing just fine." Sophia squinted, skepticism etched across her face. "If that's what you believe." She redirected her focus to her computer. Yet Henry lingered for a moment longer than necessary. Without uttering another word, he turned and strode into his office, making an effort to disregard the reality that Sophia could see straight through his frosty facade. The hours crept by, each moment laden with irritation. Henry struggled to concentrate on his tasks, as his thoughts continually wandered back to the events of the last few days. He had to break free from this state of mind. She was merely an aide, a worker like all the rest. What was it that made him unable to overlook even the smallest aspects of her? As the afternoon waned, he resolved to take action to reclaim his sense of control. He summoned Sophia to his office. As she entered, she exuded a sense of calm, as though she were not facing one of the most intimidating CEOs in the nation. "Go ahead," she said, leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed. Henry inhaled deeply. Moving forward, I intend to maintain a strictly professional approach in all interactions. Avoid superfluous discussions. Absolutely serious. Sophia arched an eyebrow. Is this for real? Absolutely. She inclined her head, observing him intently. I take it that means you'll finally stop gazing at me constantly. Correct? Henry tensed up. I don't gaze at you. Sophia wore a playful grin. Oh, so it's merely a chance occurrence that whenever I glance up, your gaze is fixed on me? He maintained his solemn demeanor. You're mistaken, she chuckled. If that's what you believe, then so be it. She pivoted and walked away. Yet, Henry sensed a constriction within him. Before he had a moment to reconsider, the words escaped his lips without his awareness. Would you be available for dinner this evening? Sophia came to an abrupt halt. She gradually pivoted, her gaze widening just a touch. Excuse me, could you clarify that? Henry took a moment to clear his throat. Join me for dinner. Sophia blinked several times. Is this some kind of prank? Absolutely not. She observed him intently for a brief moment, and here I believed she preferred to avoid superfluous discussions. It's a professional dinner gathering. Absolutely, it is. She wore a sly grin, and Henry understood in that moment that he was already defeated in this struggle. After 2 hours, Henry and Sophia found themselves at a refined restaurant, seated comfortably amidst the sophisticated ambience. Sophia glanced at the menu, feigning admiration. Wow, the prices here really have an air of superiority. Henry remained silent. What's the matter? Is this your usual way of inviting someone to dinner? Is there no clarification? There was no alert? He placed the menu gently on the table. I assumed you would agree. She chuckled softly, and I chose not to. I find myself quite taken aback. The waiter approached to take their orders, and as he departed, Sophia leaned in a bit closer over the table. What was the reason for bringing me here, Henry? He paused, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. I mentioned it's a business dinner. Deceiver. He arched an eyebrow. Excuse me? You didn't bring me here for work. You are attempting to conduct a test. Henry froze in place. Sophia beamed. I caught a glimpse of your face at the event last night. You're seeking to understand what has shifted. She propped her chin on her hand, observing him intently. What transpired with you? Henry remained silent. For the first time, he found himself without an answer. And to make matters more complicated, he found himself uncertain about whether he even desired one. As the night drew to a close, Henry took her home in his car. He brought the car to a stop and lingered in quiet contemplation. Sophia beamed with delight. I must say that was quite a delightful dinner. Henry focused intently on the steering wheel. Sophia? She cast her gaze upon him. What is it? A brief pause lingered in the air. At last, he voiced the thoughts that had been lingering in his mind. What have you done to me? Sophia stood still, caught in a moment of disbelief. A faint, nearly undetectable smile graced her lips. Silence prevails. She pushed the door ajar and emerged into the world beyond. Henry remained seated, solitude enveloping him, as her response reverberated in his thoughts. Yet he was aware. He understood that, regardless of her persistent claims of innocence, the reality was far more straightforward. Sophia Morris transformed it all. At this moment, he found himself utterly lost, unsure of how to proceed. Henry Smith had never experienced such a profound sense of chaos. In the days that followed the dinner, he endeavored to return to his normal routine, attempting to push aside the relentless thoughts of Sophia Morris. Yet, as the days went by, it became increasingly clear that a transformation had taken place within him. The issue lay in his uncertainty about how to handle the situation. In the past, life was uncomplicated. He entered the office, examined reports, finalized deals, and departed, showing little regard for anyone beyond what was essential. He now found himself searching for Sophia in the hallways, eager to hear her laughter, feeling her presence even before laying eyes on her. And even more troubling each time she approached, his body responded in a manner it never had previously. His heart raced with intensity. His breathing shifted ever so slightly. He observed subtle nuances about her that had previously escaped his attention. At that moment, he understood the peril of the situation. Sophia was turning into quite the distraction. He had no room for distractions. He had to resolve this issue before it became irreversible. By mid-afternoon, Henry found himself in the conference room, poring over a contract when a boisterous laugh echoed from outside. Sophia. He sensed her presence before his eyes even had the chance to confirm it. Her laughter danced through the air, vibrant and unrestrained, brimming with vitality. Something that contrasted with the cold, serious atmosphere of the office, yet somehow infused a sense of vibrancy into the otherwise monotonous environment. He peered through the transparent barrier and observed her engaged in conversation with Max Turner. It troubled him more than it ought to have. Max leaned in a bit closer to Sophia, sharing a remark that brought another laugh from her. Henry tightened his jaw, a silent storm brewing within him. What on earth was causing him to feel this way? Envy? Unthinkable. He was never one to feel jealousy. Always. And yet there he stood, observing Max Turner, a rising annoyance bubbling within him that defied explanation. Suddenly, without even being aware of it, he found himself standing. He strode directly toward them. Sophia? His voice emerged more cutting than he had meant it to be. She faced him with a smile, yet it vanished as soon as she caught sight of his expression. Absolutely. What can I do for you? I would like to have a conversation with you. At this moment, Max arched an eyebrow, a knowing look crossing his face, as if he was fully aware of the unfolding situation. It seems that it's time for me to take my exit. It was delightful to converse with you, Sophia. He shot her a playful wink before sauntering off. Henry despised that. Sophia folded her arms across her chest. What seems to be the issue? He hesitated before responding, as he was at a loss for words. He summoned her on a whim, lacking any genuine justification. Sophia inclined her head. Henry, are you? Is that all right? Henry blinked, suddenly aware of the absurdity of his behavior. He released a deep, weary breath, feeling exasperated with his own shortcomings. Let it go. Return to your tasks. He began to walk away, but then he sensed it. A gentle brush against his wrist. It was gentle, almost imperceptible, yet it was sufficient to halt him in his tracks. He gazed at her hand resting on his wrist, and his heart raced. Henry, she murmured, her tone gentler this time. Could you please be truthful with me? What's happening? He found himself unable to share, for the reality was that he was just as lost. Thus, he engaged in his greatest skill. He withdrew. Silence. Return to your tasks. With that, he strode away, not casting a glance behind him. Yet he understood that this battle was already lost, for her touch lingered, a searing reminder on his skin. In the subsequent days, Henry took every possible measure to steer clear of Sophia. He began assigning more responsibilities to his team, steered clear of her department, and made a conscious effort not to glance in her direction when he sensed her presence. Yet, none of his efforts bore fruit, for the harder he attempted to steer clear of her, the more she appeared to be omnipresent. He entered the elevator. Sophia was present. He set out to fetch a cup of coffee. Sophia had arrived at the cafe ahead of time. He lingered at the office long after hours. Sophia departed simultaneously. The cosmos seemed to revel in his misfortune. And then, one fateful day, she faced him head-on. Sophia rapped on his office door and entered without pausing for an invitation. Henry had anticipated that this moment would arrive eventually. She closed the door with a decisive click and folded her arms across her chest. That's enough, Henry. What's happening? He maintained a strong posture. I'm not quite sure I understand your point. Really? You don't? So, what's the reason for your avoidance? He remained silent. Sophia released a frustrated breath. If this concerns that evening at dinner, just come out with it. Have I made a mistake? Negative. So why do you seem to perceive me as a threat? Henry rubbed his face, acutely aware of his mounting fatigue. Sophia, it's really not a big deal. Simply let it go. She observed him intently for a moment, then offered him a knowing smile. "Henry, do you fear me?" His gaze snapped up to connect with hers immediately. "That's quite absurd." "Then demonstrate it." She moved in closer. Henry remained still. "If you genuinely feel indifferent, then there's no cause for discomfort, correct?" She advanced another step. His heartbeat quickened. She lifted her hand and gently brushed against his wrist. The caress was soft, yet it struck Henry with the force of a lightning bolt. Sophia beamed with delight. "Seems you're feeling a bit anxious." Henry swiftly distanced himself. "That holds no significance." "Absolutely not," she chuckled. "You appear as pale as a sheet, reminiscent of a teenager experiencing their first kiss." He did not see the humor in it. "Sophia, please put an end to this." "No, because I sense there's something significant here." She observed him intently. "I will uncover what it is." Henry remained silent. He was unable to. In that instant, he understood that Sophia had been correct all along. Something lingered in the air, a challenge he was unprepared to confront. Despite his efforts to dismiss the truth, he was acutely aware that evasion was no longer an option. Henry Smith was approaching his breaking point. In recent days, he had employed every conceivable strategy to overlook the reality that Sophia Morris was emerging as his most significant distraction. Yet nothing seemed to succeed. Steering clear of her only intensified the desire to gaze upon her. Feigning indifference only served to heighten his irritation. And now, to add to the turmoil, she was aware. Sophia sensed a shift within him, and that turned her into an even greater challenge. She began to nudge him forward, exploring the limits he had consistently maintained, gently brushing against his wrist, without a moment's pause, playfully highlighting his unease, evoking emotions in him that are unexpected. He was reluctant to grant her that influence. Yet, he could no longer feign indifference to the impact it had on him. And then arrived the ultimate strike. That evening, Henry attended a corporate gathering atop one of the city's most opulent hotels. He was certain Sophia would be present. It was a necessity of her profession. Yet, he was unready for the sight that met his eyes. Texted as soon as he stepped in. His gaze instinctively sought her out. Sophia donned a rich, wine-hued dress, graceful, impeccably tailored, featuring an open-back design that exposed just the right amount. Her hair cascaded in gentle waves. The smile she offered to those nearby radiated warmth. Seamless, way too simple. Henry despised the emotions that surged within him when he caught sight of her in that state. He was uncertain about what it truly was. Yet, if he were to articulate it, he would express that it seemed akin to possessiveness. And that was perilous. Extremely perilous. The evening stretched endlessly. He endeavored to maintain his poise. Salutations, esteemed investors. Engaging in a conversation about commerce. Steering clear of Sophia's company at every opportunity. Yet, with every fleeting look at the room, she remained ever present. Chuckling. Engaging in conversation with another person. Radiating as if destined to capture everyone's gaze. Then, he witnessed something that went too far. Sophia found herself at the bar, engaging in conversation with a familiar gentleman, Nathan Carter, an enchanting entrepreneur, fluid, renowned for his charming antics, and always seizing the chance with an enchanting lady. Henry witnessed the precise instant Nathan's hand rested on Sophia's waist. Something within him broke. He dashed across the room in a swift, instinctive motion. Sophia chuckled at something Nathan had remarked when she sensed a presence next to her. Before she had a chance to respond, Henry seized her arm. Strong, yet gentle. She glanced over at him, surprised. "Is that you, Henry?" Nathan arched an eyebrow. "Ah, if it isn't Henry Smith. Are you here to disrupt something?" Henry dismissed the remark and focused intently on Sophia. "I would like to have a conversation with you. At this moment." She blinked slowly, perplexed. "We are currently engaged in a dialogue. Could it hold off for just a moment?" Henry remained silent. He merely adjusted his grip a bit, just enough for her to sense the strain in his grasp. Nathan let out a soft laugh, as though he grasped the entirety of the situation. "Take it easy, Henry. I had no intention of taking your girl." Sophia's eyes grew large with surprise. "Excuse me? Negative." However, Henry was already guiding her away. He guided her to a quieter corner of the rooftop, shielded from curious gazes. Sophia wrenched her arm away and folded her arms defiantly. "What seems to be the issue?" Henry swept his fingers through his hair, letting out a long, deep breath. "He was reaching out to you." She fluttered her eyelids. "What does it matter? It was merely a light brush." He locked onto her gaze, steadfast and resolute. "I found it unappealing." Sophia found herself momentarily at a loss for words. Then, a playful smile gradually appeared on her lips. "Henry, do you feel envious?" He took a deep breath. "Absolutely not. So what's the purpose behind all of this?" He was at a loss for words. Sophia moved in closer. "Reveal the reality to me." Henry caught her scent. The intimacy felt overwhelming, intense. "There is no truth," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. She inclined her head, observing him intently. "So if I were to do it again with someone else, it wouldn't matter to you?" Henry shut his eyes for a fleeting moment. Then, before he could restrain his impulses, he seized the back of her neck and pressed his lips against hers. It happened quickly, fierce, without a doubt. Sophia paused momentarily, but then she returned the kiss, clutching the lapels of his jacket tightly. The surroundings faded away. The clamor of the celebration dwindled away. Only their touch remained in existence. It was Henry who made the first move to distance himself. He gradually opened his eyes, meeting the gaze of Sophia, who was intently watching him, astounded, out of breath. And that was the moment when reality struck him. "This should never have happened," he remarked, his voice icy. Sophia's eyes fluttered momentarily. "Excuse me?" He stepped back. It was an error. With her arms crossed, she fixed her gaze on him. "Is that how you kiss me? And now conclude it was an error?" Henry found himself at a loss for words. The lingering flavor of her presence remained on his lips. His skin still tingled from her touch. However, he knew he couldn't allow this to escalate any further. He refused to allow her to wield that kind of influence over him. "Never mind," he stated, struggling to keep his tone icy. Sophia emitted a laugh laced with sarcasm. "Henry, you are truly remarkable." He pivoted to depart. Yet, just as he began to move forward, her hand found its way back to his arm. "Do not run." He came to a halt. Yet, he averted his gaze from her. She moved in closer. "You pressed your lips against mine, Henry. You drew me closer. So now you wish to act as if it never occurred?" He shut his eyes briefly, seeking to reclaim his composure. Then, without looking back, he uttered the one thing that could drive her away. It was merely a spontaneous decision. "That concludes everything." Sophia remained motionless. Henry sensed the weight of her unspoken words. Then she released his arm. "Very well, if this is the approach you prefer, then we shall proceed accordingly." Her voice held no trace of anger, just a resolute determination. In that instant, Henry realized he had not driven her away. In fact, he had only escalated the perilous situation. And now he found himself with no place to escape. Henry Smith found himself slipping away from control. In the days that followed the kiss, he exerted every effort to act as if it had never occurred. He brushed past Sophia at the office, immersing himself in meetings, contracts, anything to distract his thoughts. Established an even greater sense of professionalism, avoiding eye contact for longer than a fleeting moment. However, none of it proved effective. Every time he shut his eyes, her flavor lingered on his lips. Each time her laughter echoed through the office, he was transported back to the comforting closeness they once shared. Each time he caught sight of Sophia strolling by, her gaze never drifting in his direction, a familiar ache gripped his heart. She was resorting to underhanded tactics. She remained silent, refraining from challenging him, seeking no clarifications, and posing no inquiries. She behaved as though he were invisible, and it was slowly suffocating him with each passing day. By Friday night, Henry concluded it was time to escape. He didn't indulge in alcohol very often. Yet this evening he sought to escape thought. He made his way to a sophisticated bar nestled in the heart of the city. A secluded spot where top leaders and decision-makers gathered to relax after demanding weeks. He ordered a whiskey and settled into the most remote corner of the room, glass in hand, his mind swirling with thoughts that were best left unexamined. However, the situation deteriorated. As he reclined in his chair to enjoy a sip, his gaze caught Sophia entering the bar. She had company. Next to her, chuckling and appearing utterly relaxed, was Max Turner. Henry's anger surged within him. He was uncertain about what could be more troubling. Whether it was her presence in the same bar as him or the company of another man that stirred his thoughts. Even more troubling? Max was een stoet. He was fully aware of his actions. Despite Henry's efforts to feign indifference, the truth was undeniable. He cared deeply. He loathed the thought of Sophia being with anyone else. She had yet to lay eyes on him. Yet, as though sensing his stare, she raised her eyes toward him. A brief pause for reflection. Their gazes intertwined. Henry's body stiffened. Sophia maintained eye contact for a fleeting instant. Then she beamed. She redirected her focus to Max. It was as though Henry had vanished into thin air. Henry held his glass with a firm grasp. She found herself in a match with him, and she was triumphing. 10 minutes later, Henry reached his limit. He refused to remain in that spot, feigning indifference, while Sophia chatted and laughed with Max as though he were invisible. Before he had the chance to reconsider, he rose to his feet and made his way toward her. It was Max who caught sight of him first. "Oh, Henry, what brings you here?" Henry remained silent. He gazed directly into Sophia's eyes. "May we have a conversation?" Sophia arched an eyebrow. At this moment, she appeared to find that entertaining. "Apologies, but I have prior commitments." Henry sensed his composure waning. "Just 5 minutes. That's everything I require." Sophia released a theatrical sigh and cast a glance at Max. "Would you be so kind as to share your thoughts?" Max gave a nonchalant shrug. "As long as he doesn't take you against your will, feel free to proceed." Sophia beamed and rose to her feet. "Very well, then. Just 5 minutes." Henry took her arm gently and guided her to a more secluded spot in the bar. Sophia faced him, her arms crossed defiantly. "So what's the verdict? What was of such significance?" Henry found himself at a loss for a starting point. He gazed at her, searching for the perfect words, striving to mask the urgency that churned within him. Yet, Sophia inclined her head and offered another smile. "Henry, do you feel envious?" An electric jolt surged through him. He found himself caught in a web of uncertainty, unable to fully acknowledge the truth that lingered just beneath the surface. She arched an eyebrow, a hint of disbelief in her expression. "So what brings you here? Interrupting my date?" His hands tightened into fists. "This is not an appointment." "Oh, so now you get to choose who I go out with?" Henry remained silent. Sophia moved in a little nearer. "Reveal the truth to me, Henry. What is it that you seek from me?" He was unaware, or perhaps he actually did. Yet, he found himself unable to voice it, so rather than uttering a word, he took action. Before he could rein in his impulses, he gently cradled the back of her neck and pressed his lips against hers. This kiss held a distinct quality compared to the first. This was a deliberate choice. It was capitulation. Sophia replied without delay. She clutched the lapels of his jacket, drawing him nearer, their lips intertwining, breaths mingling in the charged air. The bar, the crowd, the entire universe faded away. They were the sole presence. As they finally separated, Henry caught a glimpse of it in her gaze. Everything had changed irrevocably. "Is this still an error?" Sophia inquired, her breath coming in quick bursts. He rubbed his face, exasperated with his own shortcomings. "Indeed," Sophia chuckled. "I beg to differ." Henry found himself at a loss, unsure of his next steps. Yet he was certain of one thing. He could no longer escape this. Henry Smith had never experienced such a loss of control. He had devoted his whole existence to evading emotions, maintaining a distance from anything that might jeopardize his self-discipline. Yet now, gazing at Sophia Morris, the lingering taste of her on his lips, he realized he had utterly succumbed in this struggle. He pressed his lips to hers once more, instinctively, boldly, with no walls between them. In this moment, everything felt effortless, free from any strain or opposition. It was just the two of them, caught in a web of undeniable longing that they could no longer pretend to overlook. Sophia mirrored his fervor. She grasped his shirt with fierce determination, as though she were resolute in her refusal to release him, as if she had at last attained her long-desired goal. As they separated, gasping for air, Henry found himself at a loss for words. There was no necessity for him to do so. Sophia beamed with delight. At last, a dark shift occurred within him. He had lost all sense of right and wrong. Yet he understood that he could no longer resist this battle. In the days that ensued, everything transformed. Henry attempted to maintain an air of normalcy, concealing the turmoil beneath the surface. He compelled himself to maintain his typical composed demeanor, revealing nothing. Yet, for the first time, Sophia refused to allow him. She seemed to be in every corner. In the office, she cast him a playful glance, her smile hinting at mischief. As she navigated the hallways, her proximity felt just a touch too intimate. In the midst of discussions, her gaze fixed on him, as though she possessed an uncanny awareness of the secrets he sought to conceal. And Henry came to understand that he found himself in a precarious position. Unlike him, Sophia boldly expressed her desires without hesitation. With every day that went by, he found himself yielding more and more. On Friday, he entered the office to discover a coffee waiting for him on his desk. His brow furrowed. "What is this all about?" Sophia beamed from her desk. "Would you like a coffee?" "What is the reason?" "Simply because I desired to." He gazed at her, attempting to decipher the meaning behind the gesture. Sophia continued to wear a bright smile. In that moment, Henry became aware that a smile had crept onto his face as well. He could no longer ignore the truth. She influenced him in a manner unlike anyone else ever had. He found himself questioning whether he still wished to escape from it. That evening, Henry sat in his apartment, immersed in his work, when a notification chimed from his phone. A note: "I'm waiting outside your building. Will you be inviting me up? Will you continue to act as if nothing is unfolding?" Henry sensed his heart pounding in his chest. He might choose to overlook it. He might just choose to remain silent. Yet he was reluctant to do so. Thus he responded, "Henry, please come upstairs." Moments later, Sophia found herself standing before him. Her attire was relaxed, featuring jeans paired with a black top. Yet to Henry, she had never appeared more radiant. With her arms crossed, she wore a smile. "You're not as tough as you think, are you?" Henry observed her quietly, and then he finally took the step he had longed to take since that very first day. He drew her near and pressed his lips against hers. This moment, unafraid, without a moment's pause. The kiss that began as a flicker transformed into an all-consuming blaze. Henry drew Sophia nearer, savoring the heat of her body pressed against his hands tracing the contours of her back as he surrendered to the emotions he had long suppressed. Sophia was unapologetically bold. She had desired him for an extended period. At last, all obstacles had vanished. The stillness of his apartment contrasted sharply with the electric tension that hung in the air between them. Henry was aware that he ought to put an end to it, yet he was unable to. The sensation of her skin under his touch, the fragrance she leaves behind, the perfect alignment of her lips against his. The intensity was overwhelming. Yet, as Sophia's fingers glided over his chest, attempting to unfasten the buttons of his shirt, he recoiled. It happened without thought, intuitive. He recoiled as though struck by a sudden surge of energy. Sophia gazed at him, a look of bewilderment crossing her face. "What seems to be the issue?" Henry ran a hand through his hair, inhaling deeply, searching for the perfect expression. Yet the words eluded me. He was unprepared. Not at this moment. Sophia folded her arms, observing him intently. Henry, should I go? The idea of her leaving created a peculiar void within him. He was reluctant to let her leave. Yet he remained uncertain about the next steps to take. Thus, he resorted to the one action he was familiar with. This seems to have been an error. Sophia stood still, her breath caught in her throat. In that brief silence, words eluded them both. Then she let out a hearty laugh. Yet it lacked any sense of amusement. It was a sense of incredulity. An error? Really, Henry? There was no reply from him. Sophia shook her head, a wave of disappointment washing over her. Have you ever thought about this? This outcome was entirely foreseeable. It seems like this is a recurring theme with you, isn't it? When something slips from your grasp, you instinctively distance yourself from it. Henry accepted it without hesitation. Her insight was undeniable. Sophia snatched her bag and made her way to the door. Yet, just before departing, she cast a fleeting look back over her shoulder. There's no escaping this, Henry. And then she vanished. Henry lingered in the silence, the remnants of her presence enveloping the apartment like a haunting melody. For the first time, he experienced a profound sense of disorientation. In the days that ensued, Henry immersed himself in his tasks. Once somewhat reserved, he now seemed to vanish entirely within the confines of his own office. He steered clear of Sophia at every opportunity. Upon entering the elevator and spotting her presence, he exited swiftly before the doors could shut. Upon her entrance into the conference room, he discovered an excuse to exit before they could find themselves alone together. Yet he understood that this moment was not destined to endure indefinitely. Indeed, he was correct. It was the late hours of the night when Sophia finally confronted him. As Henry exited the office, he caught sight of her beside his car. She stood there, arms crossed. A fierce resolve etched across her features as she awaited his arrival. He contemplated the idea of returning indoors. Yet, he understood that she would not allow this to be forgotten without a fight. He approached her, letting out a soft sigh. Sophia, what brings you here? I'm hoping you'll cease this foolish behavior. His expression grew steely. It's more complex than that. Indeed, it is. You're simply overcomplicating things. As Henry unlocked the car, just as he was about to open the door, Sophia gently placed her hand over his. The caress was gentle yet charged with energy. He stood still. She moved in closer. Reveal the truth to me, Henry. He attempted to withdraw. Yet she remained resolute. Are you interested in me? Affirmative or negative? Henry closed his eyes. Then he revealed the truth. Indeed. Sophia beamed, then came to a halt. He gazed at her. What if I make a mistake here? She chuckled softly. You already are. Henry recognized the truth in her words. In that instant, he resolved his course of action. He exhaled deeply. In that moment, he drew Sophia into a kiss. This time, he stood his ground. Embrace courage. Without a doubt. Absolutely determined to keep her close. This time, Henry stood his ground. He embraced Sophia tightly, intensifying the kiss with all the passion he had been struggling to suppress. Walls had ceased to exist. Enough with the justifications. At last, the two of them surrendered to what was always meant to be. Sophia reacted instantly, clutching the collar of his shirt and drawing him nearer, as though she had at last seized what she had desired since the very beginning. Suddenly, a deep rumble echoed through the heavens. They separated slightly, becoming aware that the rain was approaching. Sophia chuckled, her fingers firmly clutching his shirt. It seems the cosmos is intent on amplifying the drama of this scene. Henry looked up at the ominous clouds looming above. In that moment, he arrived at a conclusion. Hop in the vehicle. Sophia observed him intently for a brief moment. With a gentle smile, she complied. The initial moments within the vehicle were enveloped in silence. Sophia maintained her gaze on him, anticipating his words to break the silence. Henry, in contrast, was still grappling with the weight of his recent actions. He had pressed his lips against hers. Once more. This time, he could no longer feign it was an error. For the simple reason that it wasn't. It was the best decision he had made in years. Sophia reclined in her chair, her arms folded across her chest. Is this the moment when you make your escape once more? Henry maintained his gaze. Absolutely not. Excellent. She beamed with delight. I was growing weary of that. He swept his fingers through his hair, letting out a deep breath. I struggle with this. Sophia arched an eyebrow. Skilled in what area? He paused, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Connections. Sophia chuckled softly. I'm not either. However, I believe that's not an issue. Henry gazed at her. What if I ruin everything? She held his gaze, steadfast and resolute. Next, we resolve it. He had never encountered anyone quite like her. Person unafraid. Person who remained close. For the first time, he felt a flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he could finally cease his endless flight. In the days that ensued, everything transformed. And still, everything remained the same. They remained Henry Smith and Sophia Morris, the authoritative figure and the supporting role, the leader and the subordinate. Yet, there was an added layer to consider. Their gazes held for just a moment more. Their touches became increasingly frequent, though still subtle. And above all, an unspoken tension lingered between them. Sophia relished pushing his boundaries. In a meeting, she intentionally let a pen slip from her grasp, landing near him. As she crouched to retrieve it, her voice barely above a whisper, she said for his ears alone, "You're looking at me." Henry remained unresponsive. Yet deep down he sensed it. She persistently pushed him to his limits. What's even more frustrating, he found it enjoyable. Yet Henry remained unprepared. He concealed their relationship from others. He remained silent on the matter. He never took any steps to formalize it. And Sophia observed. On a Friday evening, as they enjoyed dinner in his apartment, she finally decided to address the matter. For how much longer will we maintain this? Henry gazed at her, a look of bewilderment crossing his face. Maintain what exactly? Sophia set her fork aside and folded her arms across her chest. You understand what I'm getting at. Your behavior suggests a closeness, yet the silence surrounding us feels as if we're concealing something illicit. Henry paused before responding. He recognized the truth in her words, yet he was uncertain about how to alter it. Sophia let out a deep breath. Henry, do you feel embarrassed by me? His eyes grew large with surprise. Excuse me? Absolutely not. So, why does it seem like you're hesitant to acknowledge our relationship? Henry rubbed his face wearily, fatigue etched in his features. That's not it. This is a first for me. Sophia fell silent for a brief moment. Then softly, she inquired, Are you scared of losing me? Henry sensed the gravity of those words. Indeed, he was filled with fear, fearful of forming connections, fearful of revealing my true self, fearful of opening up and facing abandonment once more. Sophia extended her hand across the table, gently grasping his. Henry, I am not Amelia. He paused, breath caught in his chest. Sophia pressed on. I am not her. I will stand my ground even when the going gets tough. However, you must allow me entry. Henry sensed a fracture deep within him. He yearned to trust her. Yet, he found himself uncertain about his ability to do so. And that filled him with a deeper fear than anything else. In the days that ensued, Henry grew increasingly remote. That wasn't the intention. However, he was approaching all of this incorrectly. And Sophia observed. She refrained from pushing him. However, she was not fond of it. And on a Wednesday, everything finally erupted. Sophia found herself summoned to a meeting with Henry and the other executives of the company. During the whole meeting, he hardly glanced in her direction. He behaved as though their past interactions were non-existent. And that was the final breaking point. Once the meeting concluded, Sophia entered his office and closed the door firmly behind her. Henry spun around, taken aback. What is it exactly? Sophia was quick to act. What is it that you seek from me, Henry? He scowled. What do you mean by that? Are you interested in me? Affirmative or negative? He remained silent. Sophia advanced a step nearer. If that's the case, please let me know right away. However, if that's the case, please refrain from treating me as if I were an outsider in front of others. Henry experienced a constriction in his chest. He understood that a decision was necessary, yet he remained unprepared. He aired, "Perhaps it's time for us to part ways." Sophia stood still, caught in a moment of disbelief. She fell silent for a moment. Then she let out a hearty laugh. Yet it lacked any sense of amusement. It was a deep-seated resentment. With a swift motion, she seized her bag and made her way to the door. "Well done, Henry. You achieved your desire." And then she vanished. This time, Henry allowed her to continue without interruption. And that marked the gravest error of his existence. Henry Smith believed he was making the correct choice. For years, he had constructed barriers around his heart, shielding himself from anything that might threaten his grip on stability. Yet now, as he gazed at the shut door through which Sophia had just departed, he understood. He realized he had committed a monumental error. He hoped this was the right choice. Maintaining his distance was undoubtedly the most sensible decision. Yet soon after, there was nothing but silence. For the first time in ages, he became acutely aware of just how intolerable that silence had become. Sophia, conversely, preferred to avoid thoughts of him. She felt weary, exasperated by the prolonged silence from Henry regarding his true feelings, exhausted from the facade of normalcy while the truth was far from it. The following day, she effortlessly continued her journey, or at the very least she made an effort to. However, it proved to be quite a challenge to overlook Henry. He seemed to be omnipresent, within the workspace, during discussions, within the corridors. Each time she caught sight of him, she sensed his gaze upon her. Yet, on this occasion, she chose not to glance back. She was resolute in her decision to forge her own path, free from his presence. Henry found himself at a loss in dealing with that situation. In the days that ensued, Henry transformed into someone entirely new. He remained the same unyielding, focused leader. Yet within, he was a turmoil of chaos. Rest eluded him. He struggled to eat properly. And most troubling of all, he found himself unable to cease his thoughts of her. The apartment echoed with a hollow silence in her absence. The office seemed chilly in her absence, lacking the warmth of her playful banter. And Henry began to grasp a chilling truth. He had lost the ability to exist without Sophia Morris. Sophia had no intention of waiting for him. On Friday night, she ventured out with her friends. It was purely by coincidence that Henry stumbled upon a picture of her on social media, leading to his discovery. She sat at the bar, a smile gracing her lips as she cradled a vibrant drink in her hand. Beside her stood a man. He struggled to catch his breath. This was more than mere jealousy. Panic engulfed the scene. For the first time, Henry understood that she could truly move forward without him. He was unprepared for that moment. That very night, he pursued her. He had never acted so recklessly in all his days. Yet he remained indifferent. As he stepped into the bar and caught sight of Sophia laughing, reveling in the moment, he realized he had to take action. He simply couldn't bear to part with her. He approached her directly. Sophia spotted him right away, and she openly expressed her astonishment. "What brings you here?" Henry remained silent, due to his uncertainty about how to respond. Sophia then narrowed her eyes. I understand. You distanced yourself from me, and now you appear to be following me?" Henry sensed a knot forming in his stomach. "I would like to have a conversation with you." Sophia emitted a quick, sharp laugh. Her arms crossed defiantly. "Negative." Henry stood still. "Sophia, if you would be so kind, could you kindly say that again? Where was that humility when you discarded me as if I were an inconvenience?" Henry found himself at a loss for words. Sophia inhaled deeply and clutched her purse tightly. "Do you realize something? Let's wrap this up quickly. Express what you must express." Henry paused, uncertainty flickering in his mind. Yet he understood that he could no longer escape. He stated the sole aspect that held significance. "I cherish you, Sophia." Sophia froze in place. Henry had never experienced such a profound sense of vulnerability before. "What? she inquired, her tone laced with uncertainty as if she couldn't quite believe her ears. Henry inhaled deeply. My affection for you knows no bounds. Sophia remained silent. Then she let out a hearty laugh. Yet, it was laughter tinged with nerves. Is that so? So, this is when you choose to share this with me? Henry's heart raced. I realize I made a mistake. I understand that I caused you pain. However, Sophia interrupted him. Henry, I have been anticipating that for quite some time. She let out a soft sigh, her gaze fixed on him. However, at this moment, I'm uncertain if I still desire to pursue it. Henry sensed a constriction in his chest. Sophia wore a smile, yet her eyes betrayed a lingering sorrow. If your feelings for me are genuine, you'll need to demonstrate them. And then she turned and left. In that moment, he realized he must pursue her. For if he failed to act, she would slip away from him for all time. Henry Smith refused to let go of Sophia Morris. He had stumbled through every conceivable error, distanced himself from her, fled from his own emotions, and turned a blind eye to the reality before him. But now, as he watched her walk away, the chilling realization struck him that she might truly be gone for good. He was nothing without her presence. Sophia Morris was the sole element in his existence that brought clarity. He was determined to demonstrate it. The following morning, Sophia sat at her desk, attempting to concentrate on her tasks, when a disturbance caught her attention. Whispers, soft murmurs, individuals pivoting, a few raising their phones as though capturing a moment. Her brow furrowed. What's happening? She inquired of Max, who was gazing down the hallway, taken aback. He wore a sly grin. It seems your boss may be experiencing a lapse in judgment. Just as the question was about to form, Henry Smith emerged. But not in the usual way. He was not dressed in his impeccably fitted suit. He appeared neither serious nor intimidating. He stood barefoot, cradling an enormous bouquet of flowers. His suit was utterly disarrayed. Sophia almost sputtered on her coffee. Henry appeared anxious, distinctly out of his element. Yet he continued on his path, resolute. He halted directly in front of her desk. And then he melted down. The whole office came to a standstill. Sophia found herself at a loss for words. All were silent, anticipation hanging in the air. Then Henry began to speak. Sophia Morris. He swallowed hard, appearing as though he had never faced such vulnerability before. I made a foolish mistake. An utter, total, absurd fool. A voice from the back quietly remarked, That's true. And Henry cast them a piercing look filled with menace. He then redirected his gaze towards Sophia. I fled in fear, because I have never experienced anything quite like this before. For you, Sophia, achieved something that no one else has ever accomplished. Sophia remained uncertain whether this was truly happening, or if she had simply struck her head, and was now lost in a vivid hallucination. Yet Henry persisted. Your actions stirred emotions within me. A deep, resonant sigh echoed through the room. Henry inhaled deeply. And now I feel no desire to run any longer. I can't bear to be apart from you for even a moment. For in your absence, everything feels disordered. He delved into his pocket and retrieved a small box. Sophia's eyes grew large with surprise. With a deliberate motion, Henry unsealed it. Within the room, a diamond engagement ring glimmered brilliantly in the illumination. He offered her a hesitant, crooked grin. Sophia Morris, will you take my hand in marriage and endure my stubbornness and challenges for a lifetime? The office buzzed with whispers. A laugh echoed in the air. Max let out a sharp whistle. Sophia sensed the sharp prick of tears in her eyes. Suddenly, an unforeseen event unfolded. She chuckled softly. This was absolutely flawless. So Henry Smith. She found it hard to believe this was the same man who had evaded her for so long. As she gazed at him, kneeling before her, an overwhelming wave of emotion surged within her heart. Thus, she provided the sole feasible response. Absolutely, I'll marry you, you fool. Henry chuckled with relief, accepted the ring, and gently placed it onto her finger. As soon as her gaze met his once more, he leaned in and kissed her. Right there, at the heart of the office before all eyes. Never before had anyone witnessed Henry Smith in such a state of joy. Months later, Sophia remained in disbelief that it was truly happening. She stood before the mirror, clad in a breathtaking wedding gown, grappling with the reality that in mere moments, she would be united with Henry Smith as his wife, his spouse. If anyone had mentioned this to her months back, she would have found it amusing. Yet now, gazing at her reflection, she understood. She understood that all events unfolded precisely as they were destined to. As the door creaked open, Max entered the room with a sense of purpose. "Are you prepared?" Sophia inhaled deeply, offered a smile, and gave a nod of agreement. More than ever, Henry stood at the altar, his nerves heightened beyond any business meeting he had ever faced in his life. He had always found ceremonies unappealing, never enjoying the spotlight. Yet, the instant he caught sight of Sophia entering the church, he lost all sense of breath. She was flawless. For the first time, he felt no fear. He was certain this was his desire, the fulfillment of his deepest desires. She approached him, her smile glowing with warmth. As she approached him, Henry gently grasped her hand and murmured, "You look absolutely stunning." Sophia beamed. "And you're perspiring." He let out a soft laugh. And then the ceremony commenced. The vows were deeply moving. Sophia evoked both laughter and tears in Henry simultaneously. When the moment arrived to utter those fateful words, Henry showed no signs of hesitation whatsoever. For the very first time in his existence, he felt an undeniable clarity about his desires. What he desired above all else was Sophia. The reception left a lasting impression. Max delivered a speech that had half the guests in fits of laughter, tears streaming down their faces. Sophia pulled Henry onto the dance floor, despite his protests that he had no idea how to dance. As the night drew to a close and the fireworks illuminated the sky, Henry enveloped her in a warm, tight embrace. "I never imagined I could possess this," he murmured. Sophia beamed as she nestled against his chest. "What do you mean?" He gazed into her eyes. "Person akin to you." Sophia pressed her lips softly against his. "Embrace it, then. Now you're bound to me." Henry beamed with delight. This time he chose not to flee. All he desired was to remain. For eternity. What are your thoughts on the tale of Henry and Sophia? Share your reflections in the comments below. Please provide a rating for this story on a scale from 0 to 10. What is your score? Join our channel and activate notifications to stay updated with all our narratives. Be sure to explore additional heartfelt narratives by clicking here on the final screen.